The sun bled a weak orange light across the horizon as the train rattled on, cutting through the Belgian countryside. I had a beer in hand, one of those imported ones, not yet the sacred monk-brewed elixirs I'd come all this way for. My son, Sam, used to tease me about this. "You're such a snob, Dad," he'd say, grinning like he knew everything. "Just admit you like the idea of it more than the beer." Maybe he was right. Hell, Sam was right about most things. Losing him gutted me. At 19, he had the kind of spark most people chase their whole lives. His intelligence wasn't bookish. It was sharp, alive, like a constant dare to see the world bigger than it was. When he got into McGill, it felt like a win for both of us. We celebrated with a beer that night, him nursing a pale ale while I clinked a glass of stout against it. I told him how proud I was. We didn't need to say much else. That night plays in my head like a stuck record. Sometimes it's a bomb. Other times, a vice squeezing my chest. When the drunk driver ended it all in March, I didn't know what to do with myself. My ex was a wreck. Her new husband trying to hold her up while my wife, God bless her, anchored me. But there's no surviving something like that. Not really. You just crawl forward, dragging all the jagged pieces of your life behind you. The respite account became a lightning rod not long after the funeral. My ex asked if the money could go toward her stepson. I almost laughed when she brought it up, not out of malice, but because of how surreal it was. That money wasn't just cash. It was Sam's future, crystallized into numbers on a bank statement. Her request felt like trying to siphon meaning from something already stripped bare. So, I told her no. It wasn't cruel, just firm. That money was always tied to Sam, and if he couldn't spend it, I'd do what we always joked about. I'd take my trip to Belgium, drink beer brewed by monks, and toast the boy who would have laughed his ass off at the thought. My ex didn't understand, of course. Her indignation made her words brittle, accusatory, but I let it wash over me. Grief sharpens some people, dulls others. I'm not sure where I landed on that spectrum. The train jolted as it stopped, pulling me back to the present. I stepped off onto the cobblestone streets of Bruges, the city looking every bit like a painting come to life. Sam loved history, the weirder the better, and he'd have devoured the stories etched into every brick of this place. Walking through the streets felt like carrying him with me, his voice in my ear. "Look at this, Dad." I could almost hear him say. "It's like a real-life fairy tale." The next morning, I found myself at the gates of the abbey where Westfaltern beers brewed. The monks there have made it for centuries, their process unhurried and sacred. It felt appropriate, somehow. This collision of reverence and craft, the quiet dedication to something larger than oneself. When I finally got my hands on a bottle, I sat at a small wooden table in their courtyard. The beer was cold, smooth, complex in ways I couldn't have imagined. I raised my glass and whispered, "This one's for you, Sam." The words felt small against the enormity of what I wanted to say, but they'd have to do. The tears came, slow at first, then unstoppable. It wasn't just sadness, it was gratitude, anger, love, and everything in between. That trip didn't heal me. Nothing ever will. But it stitched something raw in me, just enough to hold together. It was Sam's laugh in the fizz of the beer, his curiosity in the winding streets of Bruges, his joy in the absurdity of traveling halfway across the world for a drink. When I got back, I planted a tree in our backyard, its roots reaching deep into the earth like a promise to keep going, even when the going was hard. The money's gone now, spent on flights, beers, and a few other detours I think Sam would have liked. My ex doesn't talk to me much these days, her resentment simmering quietly in the distance. But I don't regret a thing. Some might call it wasteful or indulgent. But to me, it was a way to honor the boy who made my life bigger, better, fuller. Sam would have laughed, called me ridiculous, and then toasted right along with me. And that's all the validation I'll ever need. I never thought something as simple as a loan could ruin a friendship, but here I am, wondering if I was wrong from the start. It all began 3 months ago when my best friend, Sarah, came to me in a panic. Her landlord had raised her rent unexpectedly, and she was short $1,500. She said she'd pay me back as soon as she could, that this was a one-time emergency, and she just needed a lifeline. I hesitated. Who wouldn't? It wasn't pocket change, and while I trusted Sarah, we all know the risks of mixing money and friendship. But then she started crying, saying she didn't know who else to turn to. I caved. I transferred the money to her that night. At first, I felt good about helping her out. Sarah even texted me the next morning to thank me again, promising she'd start paying me back in a couple of weeks. I told her to take her time. I wasn't in a rush, but deep down, I figured a couple of weeks meant a couple of weeks, not months. Well, 2 weeks passed. Then another. Nothing. No mention of the money, no updates. Finally, about 6 weeks in, I decided to bring it up casually during one of our hangouts. I asked, "Hey, any idea when you'll be able to start paying me back?" Sarah stiffened. "Oh, yes, soon," she said, avoiding eye contact. She sounded vague, but I didn't press. I told myself she was probably just embarrassed. Then I started noticing little things. Sarah was still going out for drinks every weekend, posting selfies with cocktails on Instagram. She bought herself a new pair of boots because they were on sale and raved about them in our group chat. She even booked tickets to a concert for next month. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that $1,500 wasn't going to magically appear out of thin air, but it was getting harder to ignore the fact that she clearly had some disposable income. Why wasn't any of it coming my way? The next time we met up, I brought it up again, trying to be lighthearted. "Those boots are cute. Maybe when you've got a little extra cash, you could toss some of it my way, huh?" Sarah's face fell, and she mumbled something about still getting on her feet. I could feel the tension rising, so I dropped it. But after that, it became impossible not to notice the elephant in the room. Whenever we hung out, I'd catch myself staring at her Starbucks cup or the new bag she was carrying, silently calculating how much closer she could have been to paying me back if she'd skipped a few luxuries. I thought maybe I was being too passive, so I tried a different approach. A few weeks later, I sent her a straightforward text. "Hey, I know you're still figuring things out, but it's been a couple of months. Can we set up a payment plan or something? Even small amounts would help." She didn't reply for hours, and when she finally did, it was a long message about how tight things still were for her and how she felt bad for not paying me back yet, but she just didn't have anything to spare. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by frustration. If she was that broke, why was she still treating herself to coffee and shopping trips? I didn't expect her to live like a monk, but it was hard not to feel like she was prioritizing everything else over me. After that, our friendship started to feel off. Sarah stopped initiating plans, and when I reached out, she was suddenly too busy or exhausted. I tried telling myself it wasn't about the money, but it was hard not to feel like she was avoiding me. The worst part was that when we did see each other, things felt strained. I'd find myself biting my tongue every time she mentioned something she'd bought or an event she was planning to attend, afraid of coming across as petty. But the resentment kept building. The breaking point came last week. Our friend group had gone out for dinner, and Sarah was there, laughing and joking like old times. When the bill came, she offered to split an appetizer she'd shared with someone else. I don't know what came over me, but I blurted out, "Wow, you can afford dinner out but still can't throw a few bucks toward what you owe me?" The table went silent. Sarah's cheeks turned red, and she stammered something about how it wasn't the time or place. I felt embarrassed too, but I was also angry. Angry that she was acting like I was the problem when she was the one who hadn't paid me back. After that, she stormed out, and later that night, she sent me a text saying she couldn't believe I'd humiliate her like that in front of everyone. I fired back that I wouldn't have had to if she just made any effort to repay me. She accused me of being pushy and said she'd pay me back when she was able, but the damage was done. We haven't spoken since. Now I don't know what to think. I feel like I had every right to ask for my money back. It's not like I'm made of cash, but maybe I shouldn't have called her out so publicly. At the same time, I can't help feeling like she's the one who put us in this situation by avoiding the issue and spending money she didn't have. Was I being too harsh, or is this just the consequence of her own choices? AITA? When Liam suggested we take a cooking class together, I thought it was a brilliant idea. We've been in a bit of a rut lately, with our weekends blending into a monotony of Netflix and takeout. A hands-on cooking workshop sounded fun, intimate even. Plus, it was Thai cuisine, a favorite of both of ours. I could already picture us laughing over sizzling woks and sipping on tom yum soup we made with our own hands. We arrived at the studio on a rainy Saturday afternoon, greeted by the sharp aroma of lemongrass and the warm chatter of other couples and friends who had the same idea. Each station had an array of colorful ingredients laid out neatly: bright red chilies, fragrant basil, glossy eggplants. I was already in love with the meticulous setup. Our instructor, Chef Nira, explained that we'd be making pad kra pao, a spicy basil stir-fry served with rice and topped with a perfectly fried egg. "This is a dish about balance," she said. "Flavor harmony. Follow the steps carefully, and it will be delicious." Her words were music to my ears. I grabbed the recipe sheet and read it thoroughly while Liam rolled up his sleeves and grabbed a knife. "All right," he said, eyeing the chilies. "Let's get creative." "Creative?" I asked, glancing at him over the edge of the paper. "Yeah, you know, put our own spin on it," he said, already picking up a lime. "Like, what if we add extra zest? And maybe some ginger? Ginger's great in everything, right?" I hesitated. "It's not on the recipe. Recipes are just suggestions," he said with a grin that was equal parts charming and infuriating. "You don't think they came up with pad kra pao by following instructions, do you? But we're in a class to learn how to make it the authentic way," I countered, feeling a flicker of anxiety in my chest. "We should stick to the steps." He waved me off. "You can follow the steps. I'll make sure ours has some pizzazz." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or sigh, but I decided to let it go. It was supposed to be a fun date, after all. I measured out the fish sauce and soy sauce, carefully spooned sugar into the bowl, and set them aside as instructed. Meanwhile, Liam was zesting limes like his life depended on it. He grabbed a handful of chilies, way more than recommended, and tossed them into the mortar. When he reached for garlic, I stepped in. "Whoa, that's way too much," I said. "Too much?" he replied, clearly amused. "Can there ever be too much garlic?" "Yes. Chef Nira said 3 cloves, and you've got like 6. It's garlic, babe. Trust me." Trust him. I wanted to, but it was hard when his version of trust looked like culinary chaos. Still, I bit my tongue and returned to my precise chopping. I followed the recipe like it was gospel, heating the oil to just the right shimmer before adding the garlic and chilies. Liam, on the other hand, threw his ingredients in haphazardly, the sizzle of the pan loud enough to make Chef Nira glance our way. "Everything okay over here?" she asked, her gaze flicking between our wildly different approaches. "Great," Liam said cheerfully. "I'm improvising a little, but I think it'll be good." She smiled politely but didn't look convinced. I shot her a silent apology and went back to stirring my wok. I was determined to prove that sticking to the rules would yield the best results. As we cooked, the tension between us simmered like the sauce in our pans. I could feel Liam's sideways glances, and I knew he was probably thinking I was being uptight. Meanwhile, I was biting back the urge to tell him he was doing it wrong. At one point, he reached over and grabbed a handful of Thai basil from my station. "Hey, I need that," I protested. "You've got plenty," he said, tossing it into his wok. "And it's all going to the same place anyway." "It's not the same. You can't just—" "Relax," he said, cutting me off with a laugh. "Cooking is supposed to be fun, remember?" I opened my mouth to argue, but snapped it shut. He wasn't wrong, exactly. I just wished we could have fun the same way. When it came time to plate our dishes, I was nervous. Liam's stir-fry looked bold. There was an aggressive amount of garlic and chilies, and his fried egg was a little too crispy around the edges. Mine, on the other hand, looked like it belonged in a food magazine. Golden egg, perfectly balanced sauce, and just the right amount of basil. We sat down to taste each other's creations. Liam took a bite of mine and nodded appreciatively. "It's good," he said. "Really good. Classic." "Thanks," I said, bracing myself as I took a bite of his. It was intense. The lime zest was overpowering. The garlic was almost bitter, and my mouth was on fire from the chilies. "Well," he asked, his eyes twinkling. "It's interesting," I said diplomatically. "You hate it." "No, I don't." "You do," I sighed, putting down my fork. "It's just really different from what we were supposed to make." "That's the point," he said, exasperated. Why make the same thing everyone else is making? Cooking is about experimenting, trying new things. You're so obsessed with following the rules that you're missing the fun. And you're so obsessed with breaking the rules that you're missing the point of the class. I shot back. We stared at each other, the room suddenly quieter despite the clatter of pans and chatter around us. I could feel my frustration bubbling over, but underneath it was something else, disappointment. I wanted this to be a shared experience, something we could both enjoy, but instead, it felt like we were on opposite sides of a culinary battlefield. After a long pause, Liam sighed. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mess up your experience. I just thought it'd be fun to make it our own, you know? I softened. I get it. I wanted us to do it together, step by step, like a team. He nodded, his expression contrite. Okay, next time, I'll try it your way. But maybe you can loosen up a little, too? Deal, I said with a small smile. We packed up our leftovers and headed home in the rain, both of us a little quieter than usual. As I replayed the day in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, was I too rigid? Or was Liam too reckless? AITA? For weeks, I had been racking my brain, trying to figure out how to help my sister, Clara. She'd been going through a rough patch after her breakup with Ben. A guy we all secretly knew wasn't good for her, but she loved him. So what could we say? The split hit her hard, and every time I called, her voice sounded hollow, her words forced. Even the little joys that usually lit her up, like painting or her obsession with niche teas, seemed to fade into the background. I hated seeing her like that. So, I decided to do something about it. Clara had always wanted to visit a botanical garden, specifically the one in the next city over, famous for its sprawling glasshouse and rare tropical flowers. She'd mentioned it a few times in passing, saying it was on her list. I figured it'd be the perfect way to get her out of her funk. A day surrounded by vibrant colors, fresh air, and something she loved. To make it extra special, I planned a picnic with all her favorite things. That imported jasmine tea she was obsessed with, her go-to snack, blueberry scones, and even a little paint set I bought in case she felt inspired. I'd thought of everything. The planning was no small feat. I had to rearrange my work schedule to get a day off. Call the garden ahead to check accessibility. Clara has a slight limp and hates long walks without benches. And borrow a friend's car since mine was acting up. Oh, and did I mention that I spent 3 hours the night before baking those scones from scratch? I'm no baker, but Clara always said homemade stuff tasted better because it came with love. It was all worth it if it meant cheering her up. On the big day, I showed up at her apartment at 9 a.m., buzzing with excitement. I'd even packed the picnic into a cute wicker basket for the full aesthetic. When she opened the door, she was in her usual post-breakup attire. Oversized hoodie, mismatched socks, hair in a messy bun. She squinted at me like I was a traveling salesman. "What's all this?" she asked. "Surprise," I said, holding up the basket. "We're going on an adventure." She looked at me suspiciously. "Where?" I explained the plan, watching her expression shift from confusion to something closer to annoyance. "You planned a trip without asking me?" she said, crossing her arms. "What if I had plans?" I laughed, thinking she was joking. "You? Plans? Clara, you've been holed up for weeks." Her frown deepened. "Wow, way to call me out. Maybe I like being holed up. Did you ever think of that?" Taken aback, I stammered, I just thought you'd enjoy this. You've always wanted to go to the garden." She sighed dramatically. "Yeah, but not today. I'm not in the mood to be paraded around some garden like a sad project you're trying to fix." Her words stung. "It's not like that. I just wanted to cheer you up by dragging me somewhere I didn't agree to," she shot back. "Classic you, always deciding what's best for me without even asking." I felt my temper flare, but tried to keep it together. "I spent days planning this, Clara. I thought it'd be fun. I even made your favorite scones." She glanced at the basket like it was radioactive. "Great. Now I have to feel guilty for not appreciating your effort." At that point, I didn't know what else to say. We stood there in awkward silence until I finally mumbled, "Well, if you change your mind, let me know," and left. The drive to the garden was miserable. I ended up going by myself because, honestly, what else was I going to do? I tried to enjoy it, but everything reminded me of how much I tailored this day for her. The benches I checked on? Useless. The tea? Bitter without her company. Even the stupid scones tasted like dust. I sat on the picnic blanket in a corner of the garden, watching families and couples enjoy their day, and wondered what I'd done wrong. Later that evening, she texted me. Thanks for the thought, but next time ask first. That was it. No acknowledgement of how much time, effort, or love I'd poured into trying to make her happy. Just a passive-aggressive slap on the wrist for not consulting her first. I felt like I was being punished for caring too much. I know Claire is hurting, and people don't always react logically when they're in pain, but it's hard not to feel like the villain here. I wasn't trying to fix her or force her to do anything. Just give her a little piece of joy when it seemed like the world had taken so much from her. How did it end up being a bad thing? Am I really the bad guy for trying? AITA? It started innocently enough. A casual conversation over dinner about how quiet the house felt. Jake had just taken a sip of wine when he said, "You know, we should think about getting a pet. It might be nice to have something furry running around." I practically lit up like a Christmas tree at the idea. I'd wanted a dog forever, but with our schedules and the whole moving in together adjustment, it hadn't felt like the right time. Now, though? Now it felt perfect. "Yes," I blurted, maybe too enthusiastically. Jake raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into that small smile he always gives when he's amused but trying to hide it. "What kind of pet are you thinking?" he asked, setting his glass down. "Because I was thinking maybe a cat." A cat? Not what I was expecting. My dream had always been to have a dog, a big, energetic goofball who'd keep me company on morning runs, go hiking on weekends, and flop down exhausted next to me in the evenings. I could already see it. The two of us bounding through the park, my sneakers pounding the trail while a golden retriever or maybe a lab trotted alongside me, tongue lolling happily. "A dog," I said confidently. "Definitely a dog." Jake leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. But a cat would fit better with our life, don't you think? They're low maintenance. They don't need walks or training. They're chill." His tone was calm, but I could see a flicker of something, hope, in his eyes. He wanted me to agree. "But that's the thing," I countered. "I don't want chill. I want something I can do things with. Dogs are companions. They go on adventures with you. Cats just exist." "Okay, that's unfair," Jake said, chuckling softly but with a hint of defensiveness. "Cats are affectionate too. They're just different about it. And you know how much I love to read in the evenings? Imagine a cat curled up on the couch next to us, purring while we unwind. It would add so much calm to the house." "And a dog would add fun," I said, smiling but feeling the beginnings of tension in my chest. "I mean, sure, they're a little more work, but isn't it worth it? Plus, I've always wanted a dog, Jake. Always." "Yeah, but have you ever had one?" he asked, tilting his head. I shook my head, which he must have expected. I grew up in an apartment with strict, no pets rules, while Jake's family always had animals. He'd grown up with cats, plural, curling around his legs, snoozing on his homework, or pouncing on stray bits of string. He knew them like family. "It's not just about me, though," I said, trying to sound reasonable. "I think a dog would be good for us. It would get us out of the house more, keep us active." "We're already active," he interrupted gently. "I go to the gym. You run? You don't need a dog for that." "It's different," I insisted. "It's not just about exercise. Dogs, they're social. They bring people together." Jake gave a short laugh. "They also chew on furniture, bark at squirrels, and wake you up at 6 a.m. And cats don't knock things off shelves at 3 in the morning?" I shot back, grinning despite myself. We went back and forth like this for the rest of dinner. It wasn't a fight, not really, but it wasn't not a fight either. Afterward, we sat on the couch, scrolling through adoption listings on my laptop. He'd stop on pictures of sleek tabbies or fluffy Maine Coons with piercing eyes and read their descriptions aloud. I couldn't deny they were cute, but when I'd scroll to the dogs, tails wagging, faces full of uncontainable joy, my heart practically leapt out of my chest. We spent days in this limbo. Every time we revisited the subject, we'd make progress only to circle back to where we started. I tried to picture myself with a cat, and while I could imagine it, curled on my lap while I sipped coffee, its soft fur warm against my hand, it didn't spark the same joy. Jake, on the other hand, was clearly struggling to envision life with a dog. One night, I asked him outright, "Why do you want a cat so badly?" He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the edge of the coffee table. "I guess because it reminds me of home," he admitted finally. "When things got chaotic or stressful, the cats were always there. They were calm when everything else wasn't. I just need that, you know? That sense of comfort." His voice was so soft, so vulnerable. It broke my heart a little. Jake didn't open up like that often, and when he did, it was like catching a glimpse of something rare and precious. I reached for his hand and squeezed it. "I get that," I said, and I meant it. He looked at me. "Why do you want a dog so badly?" I took a deep breath. "Because I never got to have one growing up. I always felt like I was missing out on this amazing experience, and now I have a chance to finally have it. I guess it feels like filling a gap I've had my whole life." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of it all sinking in. We wanted to make each other happy, but our desires were tied so deeply to who we were, it felt impossible to choose. Eventually, Jake spoke. "What if we compromise?" "Compromise how?" I asked skeptically. He shrugged. "Maybe we start with one and add the other later. Or we get something totally different, like a rabbit or a bird." "A rabbit or a bird is not a compromise," I said, laughing. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Neither of us wanted to budge, but neither of us wanted to disappoint the other, either. So here we are, stuck in a stalemate, scrolling through adoption sites and imagining two very different futures. I want Jake to have the comfort he craves. I want the joy I've always dreamed of. But is there a right answer here? AITA? The road stretched endlessly before me, bathed in the dim glow of early morning. It was one of those commutes where the hum of the tires seemed louder than usual, and every car felt like an adversary in a relentless game of survival. My coffee sat in the cup holder, untouched, as I focused on making my exit. A slow car in the right lane loomed ahead, and with the precision of a chess player eyeing their next move, I calculated the exact moment to shift lanes and breeze past. But then, the car sped up, cutting me off and forcing me to slam on my brakes. My pulse quickened as irritation bubbled up. I turned to glare at the offender and froze. It was my wife. Her face was lit up with a smile that could rival the morning sun. One hand rested on the steering wheel while the other waved enthusiastically, her joy unshaken by the chaos she'd just caused. The confusion hit me first, followed swiftly by annoyance. She just sped up to block my exit. I gave her a curt look and focused back on the road, unwilling to risk missing my turn or worse, causing an accident. Out of the corner of my eye, her smile faltered, and I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly drowned by frustration. The freeway at rush hour was no place for these antics. Later, I glanced at my phone after parking at work. There was a message from her. "Didn't wave back, huh?" That made me sad. I stared at the words, expecting a playful tone to emerge, but the message remained stubbornly sincere. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? "Sorry for prioritizing not crashing my car over waving at you?" I shoved my phone into my pocket and let the moment pass. By the time we sat down for dinner that evening, the tension hung in the air like a cloud threatening rain. She brought it up again, and her tone made it clear this wasn't just teasing. "Why didn't you wave back this morning?" she asked, her fork hovering midair. "Because I was trying not to miss my exit." I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "And honestly, what were you thinking? Speeding up like that? It's dangerous." Her face twisted into a mix of hurt and anger. "I wasn't trying to be dangerous. I was happy to see you. I thought it would be a sweet moment, but you acted like I was just another bad driver. And you were." I countered, exasperated. "I didn't even know it was you at first. I was just trying to avoid an accident." She set her fork down and crossed her arms. "You could have smiled or something, even after you saw it was me." The argument circled like a hawk over prey, neither of us willing to back down. Her disappointment was palpable, and I started to feel like I'd missed something important. This wasn't just about a missed wave. She saw it as rejection, a failure to acknowledge her love in that brief, chaotic moment. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her words replayed in my head. I'd been so focused on the mechanics of driving that I'd forgotten the simple joy she was trying to share. She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She was reaching out, trying to brighten my morning in her own unique way, and I'd brushed it off, too consumed by my irritation to see it for what it was. The next morning, I left earlier than usual, hoping to catch her on the road again. When I saw her car in the lane beside me, my heart raced. This time, I slowed down and honked lightly, rolling down my window to wave. Her face lit up with surprise and then a beaming smile that erased the tension from the night before. We exchanged a brief glance before the flow of traffic pulled us apart, but the warmth lingered. As I made my exit, I thought about how easy it was to let the small frustrations of life overshadow the moments that truly matter. My wife's gesture had been a reminder to cherish those fleeting connections, even in the midst of chaos. From then on, I decided to hold on to those moments tighter, even if it meant waving like a fool in morning traffic. When my sister called me last Wednesday, I knew something was up. She never calls unless it's important, and her voice had that particular strain I recognized from years of being the one who usually swooped in to save the day. So, I braced myself as I leaned against the kitchen counter, my half-drunk cup of coffee cooling next to the pile of bills I'd been organizing. "Lena," she began, dragging out my name like a plea, "I need a huge favor. My stomach's ache." I wasn't in a position to be anyone's savior right now. Between work deadlines, dealing with Jamie's school struggles, and trying to keep the fragile balance of our household intact, I was barely holding it together myself. But, of course, I said, "What's going on?" It turned out she'd gotten a last-minute opportunity to attend a week-long business conference in Los Angeles, a big chance to pitch her freelance consulting services to a major client. But the problem was her 6-year-old son, Ben. Her regular babysitter had fallen through, and she didn't trust anyone else to handle him. The implication hung heavy in the air before she finally said it. "I was hoping you could take him for the week. Ben is a great kid, but he's a handful. High energy, curious, prone to meltdowns when his routine changes. My sister has always insisted it's part of his charm, but I knew how much effort it took to keep up with him, and how little I had left to give." Jamie, my own 9-year-old, was already struggling with anxiety and attention issues that demanded most of my time and energy outside of work. Adding Ben to the mix felt impossible. I took a deep breath, trying to phrase my response gently. "I don't think I can manage that, Jess. Things have been really chaotic here lately. Jamie's got another evaluation coming up, and I'm swamped at work. I just don't think I'd be able to give Ben the attention he needs right now." She didn't respond right away. The silence stretched long enough to make me wonder if the call had dropped. Then she said, her tone sharpening, "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying it's not a good time for me to take on something this big," I explained. "Maybe I can help you find someone else? I could call around, see if anyone—" "No," she interrupted, her voice tight. "I don't trust anyone else with him. You know that." "Jess, I get it," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But I have to think about Jamie and myself, too. I can't pour from an empty cup." She scoffed. "Oh, come on, Lena. It's 1 week. You're his aunt. I'd do it for you in a heartbeat." I bit my lip. Would she? Maybe she would have when things were easier for her, but I couldn't imagine her stepping up now, not with her own plate so full. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I physically, emotionally, and logistically couldn't take this on, no matter how much I wanted to help. I tried to explain, again, why this wasn't just a matter of inconvenience. I told her about Jamie's recent struggles, how he'd been waking up in the middle of the night panicked about everything from math tests to whether the house might burn down. I told her about my own workload and how I'd barely had time to sleep, let alone add another high-energy child to the mix. But Jess wasn't having it. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she said, her voice breaking in a way that made my chest ache. "You're supposed to be my sister. You know how important this is for my career. How am I supposed to make this work if I can't even count on you?" "I know it's important, and I wish I could help," I said, feeling the lump rising in my throat. But I just can't. I'm sorry, Jess. I really am. Yeah, sure, she said bitterly. You're sorry. That makes everything better. I tried once more to offer alternatives. Could she postpone the trip? Ask the conference organizers if there was childcare available on site? Maybe even consider a short-term nanny service? But every suggestion was met with resistance or flat-out rejection. No one understands Ben like you do, she insisted. And you're seriously telling me you're going to put your job in Jamie's, whatever, over helping your own nephew? That stung. I knew she didn't mean to diminish what Jamie was going through, but her frustration was boiling over into anger now, and I could feel the hurt behind her words. I'm not putting anything over Ben, I said quietly. I'm doing what I have to do to keep my own family stable. That doesn't mean I don't care about you or him. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she muttered something about figuring it out herself and hung up. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave. I spent the rest of the day second-guessing myself, replaying the conversation in my head. Was I being selfish? Could I have tried harder to make it work? Maybe I was overestimating how much of a strain it would be. But every time I started to waver, I thought about Jamie, about his fragile sense of security, about how much effort it had taken to build even the semblance of stability he was starting to trust. If I disrupted that, even for a week, just to prove to Jess that I wasn't unsupportive, what kind of message would that send to him? The next morning, I sent Jess a long text apologizing again and reiterating that I wanted to help in any way I could short of taking Ben in. I offered to cover the cost of a babysitter or help her figure out a different plan. She didn't respond. That night, I saw she'd posted something on Facebook, a vague status about how disappointing it was when family refused to step up for each other. The comments were full of sympathy and outrage on her behalf. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to drag our personal issues into the public eye. But as the days passed and she still didn't reach out, the question kept gnawing at me. Ida? Last Saturday, my sister called me in a panic. It was her wedding day, and the hairstylist she had booked for months had canceled last minute. She was frantic, saying no one else was available, and she begged me to step in. To clarify, I'm not a professional hairstylist, but I've done her hair for special events before, and she's always said I'm pretty good at it. Still, I don't take compliments like that too seriously. I just do it for fun. Anyway, I had plans. Big ones. My favorite band was in town for the first time in years, and I had tickets to see them that evening. Not just any tickets, mind you. VIP passes. Front row. Meet and greet. The whole deal. I'd been saving up for months to splurge on this experience. I was practically vibrating with excitement. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I wasn't about to let it slip away for anything. Not even for my sister's wedding crisis. When she asked me to come over right away to help her out, I hesitated. I knew how much this meant to her. She had been planning her dream wedding for over a year, and I understood she was under immense pressure. But this concert? It was my dream. She couldn't possibly expect me to give that up, could she? So I told her, as calmly as I could, that I couldn't make it. I said I had other plans I couldn't cancel. At first, she didn't say anything, which I took as a good sign. But then, her voice cracked and she asked, what could possibly be more important than my wedding day? I tried to explain how long I had been waiting for this concert and how much it meant to me, but she didn't seem to care. She started crying, saying she didn't know what to do and that I was her only hope. Her words stung a little, I won't lie, but I stuck to my guns. I told her I was sorry, but I wasn't going to miss this concert for anything. She hung up on me, and I didn't hear from her again that day. I didn't feel great about it, but I told myself she'd figure something out. She always does. My mom called me an hour later, though, and let's just say her tone was less understanding. She called me selfish, heartless, and accused me of ruining my sister's big day. I told her it wasn't my responsibility to save the wedding. She didn't like that answer. I went to the concert, of course, and it was everything I hoped it would be. I sang along to every song, took selfies with the band, and even got one of the guitarist's picks as a souvenir. It felt like magic, a night I would never forget. But in the back of my mind, there was this little gnawing feeling. Guilt. Maybe. I brushed it off. I figured once the dust settled, everyone would see that my decision wasn't the end of the world. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of texts from family members. Apparently, my sister had to scramble to find a replacement. She ended up doing her own hair, and it didn't come out the way she wanted. In the pictures I've seen since, you can tell she wasn't thrilled with it. People also said she was distracted and teary during the ceremony, which they blamed entirely on me. My mom and dad both sent me long, scathing messages about how disappointed they were, and my sister hasn't spoken to me since. Even my brother, who's usually on my side, called me an inconsiderate jerk. I don't think I did anything wrong, though. I had every right to stick to my plans, didn't I? It's not like I made her hairstylist cancel. If anything, I feel like they should be mad at the stylist, not me. Why is it my job to fix someone else's mistake? And why does my happiness have to come second to hers, just because it was her wedding day? I get that weddings are a big deal, but they're not the only thing that matters in life. Still, I can't shake the feeling that maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have tried harder to find a compromise, or at least been a little more sympathetic. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like my family is overreacting. It's not like I skipped the whole wedding. I went to the ceremony and the reception after the concert. Sure, it was a little late, and people were giving me the cold shoulder, but I was there. Doesn't that count for something? Now I'm stuck in this awkward limbo where everyone is mad at me, and I don't even know if I care. I had the best night of my life at that concert, and no one can take that away from me. But at the same time, I hate being the bad guy. I've always been the one who tries to keep the peace, but this time, I chose myself. Was that so wrong? Should I have put my dreams on hold for my sister? Or is it okay to put yourself first once in a while? AITA? The email had come in at 2 a.m., the kind of timestamp that hinted at frustration, insomnia, or perhaps both. I woke to it, blurry-eyed, my phone buzzing next to the alarm clock. The subject line read, "Uninvited." A lump formed in my throat as I opened it, knowing exactly what it was about. A Halloween wedding. My dream wedding. 2 years of planning, perfecting, and patiently waiting for the venue with the Gothic charm, the towering candelabras, and the echo of spooktacular vibes. And now, 6 weeks before the big day, my family had decided it was satanic. The first call had come from my grandmother, a voice sharp with concern. "I prayed about this, and God told me this wedding isn't right," she said. "It's Halloween, dear, a day of demons and ghouls. How could you celebrate something so dark on the day of your union?" My protestations about creative freedom and the love of a good theme fell on deaf ears. Then came my mother's reinforcement of this newfound moral crusade. "It's just not appropriate. Can't you change the date? Or maybe just the theme?" They were proposing I revamp 2 years of planning over superstition. When I said no, my mother rallied her troops. It started small, a cousin voicing her concerns, an uncle making vague statements about discomfort. But then, one by one, my mom's side of the family began pulling their RSVPs. Not just pulling them, but doing it loudly. Aunts with scathing comments on social media, cousins in group chats claiming the venue was cursed. It wasn't long before one of my sisters dropped out of bridesmaid duty, saying she couldn't support a wedding under such a shadow. I sat staring at my spreadsheet of attendees, now riddled with question marks and gaps. Panic boiled into anger. These weren't distant relatives. These were the people I grew up with. The people who had known about this plan for 2 years and hadn't said a word until now. If they wanted a power struggle, fine. They'd find out who was in charge. The email I sent out later that evening was short but clear. "If you've expressed objections to my wedding theme or timing, I'm assuming you no longer wish to attend. I've updated the guest list accordingly. I added a note about new QR-coded invitations, ensuring that only confirmed guests could enter the venue." It was petty and precise, and exactly what they deserved. Of course, the backlash was immediate. My aunt called, livid. "People are allowed to disagree with you," she snapped. "But that doesn't mean you can just uninvite them. They've made plans to be there." I countered with what had become my mantra. They had 2 years to complain. Pulling this nonsense 6 weeks out isn't just rude. It's sabotage. For a moment, there was silence. Then she asked, in a tone that could have cut glass, "Do you really want to do this without family?" I hesitated, but only for a second. I'd rather have 20 people who actually support me than 100 who are judging me. She hung up. That night, I replaced my sister with a college friend who had been there for me through everything, including the messy breakup that preceded meeting my fiancé. I filled the guest list with the chosen family I'd built over years, friends who didn't need an explanation for why I wanted a corpse bride wedding, because they thought it was amazing from the start. I closed my laptop with a sense of finality and went to bed, exhausted but relieved. The week before the wedding, the drama hit its peak. My grandmother sent a letter. Yes, an actual letter, imploring me to reconsider. It was full of biblical references and dire warnings about the consequences of dabbling in the occult. My mother called again, her voice a mix of sadness and exasperation. "I don't know how we got here," she said. "It's not too late to fix this." For a split second, I wavered. Then I remembered the way they'd blindsided me, the way they'd used my wedding as a battleground for their beliefs. "It's already fixed," I said and hung up. On the day of the wedding, the venue was everything I dreamed it would be. The towering iron gates, the cobwebbed archways, the flickering candles casting eerie shadows. My fiancé stood at the altar, grinning, his velvet jacket a deep shade of midnight blue. The guests, those who had truly wanted to be there, were dressed to the nines in costumes that ranged from elegant to hilariously over the top. My best friend came as Lydia Dietz, complete with a red wedding dress, and my fiancé's uncle showed up as Dracula, complete with a cape that swept the floor. As I walked down the aisle to the haunting strains of a cello, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This was my day, our day. The people who mattered were here, and the ones who didn't were exactly where they belonged. Somewhere else? When the officiant asked if anyone objected, the silence was both satisfying and symbolic. Later, as we danced under the chandeliers, one of my cousins, who had defied my mom's boycott, leaned in and said, "This is the coolest wedding I've ever been to. I don't know what their problem was." I smiled, knowing that whatever it had been, it no longer mattered. By the time the night ended, and we'd driven off into the foggy night in a hearse-turned limousine, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. My family might have tried to derail me, but they'd only made me stronger. I'd stood my ground, and the result was everything I'd ever wanted. Winning those tickets felt like the universe finally giving us a break. It wasn't just a regular event. It was the event. For me, it was the band that had carried me through high school heartbreaks, all-night study sessions, and those long commutes where life felt too heavy. For Taylor, my best friend and partner in crime, it was something different. They discovered the band later, during a summer spent on solo road trips with the windows down and the stereo blasting. So when I opened my inbox and saw that we'd snagged 2 VIP passes to their once-in-a-decade reunion tour, I screamed so loudly that our downstairs neighbor banged on the ceiling. Taylor came running into the room, half panicked, half curious. I waved my phone like it was Willy Wonka's golden ticket. "We're going. Front row. Meet and greet, the whole thing." Their face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning, and we ended up doing an impromptu victory dance in our tiny living room. It was perfect, until the planning started. I say we get there by noon, I announced a few days later. Doors open at 6, and we need to be first in line for the best spots. Plus, the pre-show vibe with other fans is going to be insane. You meet the coolest people waiting in line. Taylor gave me that half smile they always used when they were trying not to burst my bubble. Or we could show up around 5:30, just before the doors open. Skip the hours of standing around, avoid the chaos, and still have plenty of time to enjoy the show. I blinked at them, genuinely confused. Skip the chaos? The chaos is the point. It's part of the experience. "Yeah, for you," they said, leaning back in their chair. "But you know me. I'm not a fan of crowds unless I have to be. I want to enjoy the concert without being drained before it even starts." It was a fair point. Taylor wasn't shy, but they had this way of conserving their social energy like it was a rare resource. Meanwhile, I thrived on the buzz of strangers who shared my enthusiasm. I figured we'd talk it out, find some middle ground. We had weeks to figure it out, after all. But the conversation kept cropping up, and every time it did, it got harder to pretend we weren't at an impasse. One night, as we sprawled on the couch scrolling through set lists from previous shows, I tried again. What if we compromise? We get there at, say, 3? It's not as early as I'd like, but it's not last minute either. Taylor didn't even look up from their phone. That still leaves us standing around for hours. I'd rather save my energy for the actual concert. And I'd rather not feel rushed or miss out on the fan community. Half the fun is geeking out with people who care as much as we do. Their sigh was heavy, but not angry. Just tired. Why does it matter so much to you? Because this is once-in-a-lifetime stuff, Tay, I said, trying not to sound as frustrated as I felt. I don't want to look back and think we didn't make the most of it. Taylor put down their phone and looked at me, their expression softening. And I don't want to look back and think I spent the whole time wishing I was somewhere else. Doesn't that count too? It did. Of course it did. And yet, every time I pictured us rolling up minutes before showtime, squeezing past people who'd been waiting all day, and settling for whatever spots were left, my stomach twisted. How could I explain that to Taylor without making them feel like their perspective didn't matter? The day of the concert finally arrived, and the tension between us was palpable. We'd agreed, sort of, to aim for 4 o'clock, splitting the difference. But as I paced the kitchen at 2:45, glancing at the clock every 5 minutes, I could feel my resolve crumbling. I think I'm going to head out early, I said, trying to sound casual. You can meet me there later if you want. Taylor looked up from the couch, their expression unreadable. So you're just going without me? I'm not going without you. I'm just getting there ahead of you. It's not a big deal. It kind of feels like a big deal, they said quietly. We won these tickets together. I thought the whole point was to share the experience. That stopped me in my tracks. My gut reaction was to argue, to say that we were sharing it, just in our own ways. But the hurt in their voice made me hesitate. I just don't want to miss out, I said finally. On the atmosphere, the energy, everything that makes this more than just a concert. And I don't want to spend hours standing around, getting overwhelmed before it even starts, Taylor countered. So what do we do? Split up? Spend half the day annoyed with each other? I sat down next to them, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. Maybe we're both being stubborn. Maybe, they said with a small smile. But I don't know how to make this work without one of us feeling shortchanged. In the end, we compromised, kind of. I convinced Taylor to leave earlier than they wanted, and they convinced me to stay later than I'd planned. We got there around 4:30, not exactly early, but not last minute either. The line was long, and I couldn't help feeling a pang of regret for not arriving sooner. But as we stood together, chatting with the fans around us and soaking in the pre-show excitement, I realized it wasn't so bad. Taylor even struck up a conversation with a guy in a vintage band tee, surprising both of us. By the time the doors opened, the tension between us had mostly melted away. We found decent spots close to the stage, not the front row I dreamed of, but better than I'd feared. And when the band came out, all of my frustrations disappeared. For a couple of hours, it didn't matter how early we'd arrived or how long we'd waited. It was just us, the music, and the kind of magic you can't recreate. Still, as we walked back to the car afterward, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd handled it the best way we could have. Did I push too hard? Should I have respected Taylor's preferences more, or did they undervalue mine? So, AITA? It started with a call, one I didn't expect to go sideways so quickly. I had been putting off the conversation for weeks, but when the offer letter landed in my inbox that morning, I knew it was time. I didn't want my sister hearing it from anyone but me. Besides, she deserved the truth. I was moving to Chicago. Chicago? Sophia's voice crackled through my Bluetooth speaker as I sat in my car, parked under the wilting oak tree in front of our childhood home. Her tone was a blend of surprise and something sharper. Hurt, maybe. Why Chicago? What's wrong with staying here? It's an amazing opportunity, I started, already knowing that wasn't the answer she wanted. A leadership role in marketing. It's exactly what I've been working toward. And the salary. I trailed off, hesitating to bring up money. It always felt cheap to frame decisions around a paycheck when talking to her. Sophia, ever blunt, didn't let the pause go unchallenged. And what about me? What about Mom? You're just gonna leave us? You know she's getting worse, right? I winced, even though I'd known this was coming. Mom's health was no secret. Her early signs of dementia had crept into every corner of our lives. Forgetting her keys, calling me Sophia and Sophia me, telling the same stories 4 times in one sitting. It was hard to watch, but Sophia had always taken the brunt of it. She still lived with Mom, helping with bills, errands, and the emotional labor I conveniently avoided from across town. Soph, I'm not abandoning anyone, I said carefully. I'll come back often. It's not like I'm moving across the world. I regretted it the moment the words left my mouth. The distance wasn't the point, and I knew it. That's easy to say when you don't have to come home to her wandering outside barefoot at 2 a.m., looking for a cat we haven't owned in years. Easy when you're not the one convincing her to take her meds while she calls you a stranger in her own kitchen. Her voice cracked, the way it always did when she was on the edge of crying but too stubborn to let the tears fall. I bit my lip, staring at the dashboard, unsure what to say. She wasn't wrong. Sophia had been the anchor in our little family, and I had been the one leaning on her without realizing how much weight I was shifting onto her shoulders. I know it's not fair, I admitted, my voice quiet. You've been amazing, holding everything together. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that. But this job, it's my shot, sophomore. If I pass this up, I don't know when, or if, I'll get another chance like it. And if you go, what happens to me? She snapped, no longer hiding the quiver in her voice. You think I want to be the one left behind to pick up the pieces? I had dreams too, you know, but someone has to stay, right? Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what hurt more, the resentment in her tone or the truth behind it. She'd wanted to go back to school, to finish her art degree, to build a life outside the confines of our family's increasingly chaotic orbit. But there was always an excuse. Tuition was too expensive, Mom needed her, and I was too preoccupied with my career to shoulder the burden alone. We can figure something out, I said, desperation creeping in. Maybe we can hire help for Mom. Or you could move to Chicago too. You've always wanted a fresh start. Why not now? Sophia let out a bitter laugh. Do you even hear yourself? We can figure something out. That's rich, coming from the one planning to leave. And Chicago? Sure. Let me just pack up Mom and my non-existent savings and move to one of the most expensive cities in the country. Sounds like a plan. I don't mean it like that, I said, frustrated with how badly I was fumbling this. I just want you to have options. You shouldn't have to sacrifice everything for Mom. And yet, here I am, sacrificing. Her words hung heavy in the air, filling the silence like smoke. For a while, neither of us said anything. I could hear her breathing on the other end, uneven and shallow, like she was trying to calm herself down. I wanted to reach through the phone and hug her, to tell her I'd stay if it would make things better. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I wanted this job. I needed it, not just for the paycheck, but for the validation that all my late nights and missed family dinners have been worth it. I don't want us to fight, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I, she replied, softer now. But I don't know how to do this without feeling like you're leaving me behind. I'm not, I promised. I'll make it work. I'll come home more often. I'll help with the bills. We'll figure out a system so it's not all on you. You say that now, but what happens when life gets busy? When you're drowning in deadlines and meetings and new friends? The hurt was still there, but it was gentler now, wrapped in worry rather than anger. I won't forget you, sophomore. Or Mom. I swear. It sounded hollow, even to me, but I meant it. Or at least, I wanted to mean it. She sighed, long and deep, the kind of sigh that held years of exhaustion and unsaid words. I want to believe you, she said. I really do. But right now, it just feels like you're choosing yourself over us. And maybe I am, I admitted, the confession stinging as it left my lips. But does that make me a bad person? For wanting something for myself, for once. Sophia didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost resigned. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't, but it sure feels like it. The call ended not long after, with promises to revisit the conversation, to find a way forward together. But as I sat in my car, staring at the cracked driveway we used to rollerblade on as kids, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. Was I selfish? Or was I just trying to survive in a world that demanded sacrifices from everyone, no matter how unfair? Ida? I knew I shouldn't have let the conversation happen before coffee, but there we were, standing in the kitchen, squabbling over something so small I'm embarrassed to even put it into words. The issue? The dishwasher. Specifically, whose turn it was to unload it. This wasn't the first time Mason and I had locked horns over household chores. We'd been living together for almost a year, and while most days we got along fine, these small disagreements always managed to spiral into something much bigger than they had any right to be. Mason, it's your turn, I said firmly, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. I pointed at the whiteboard on the fridge, where we kept a running tally of who did what. You said last week you'd take care of unloading after your 3-day streak of forgetting. He glanced at the board like it was a crime scene he had no memory of being at. I've done it the last 3 times, maybe more. You're just bad at keeping track. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Not a nice laugh, but the sharp, incredulous kind that immediately made his jaw tighten. Oh, I'm bad at keeping track? Mason, you literally wrote, I owe you one next to your name. It's been there for 5 days. Yeah, because you keep this ridiculous score system like we're in middle school, he snapped, his voice rising a notch. It's not that deep. Just do it if it bothers you so much. My coffee-deprived brain decided it was a good time to double down. Not that deep? Okay, so if it's not that deep, why can't you do it? He sighed, leaning back against the counter and crossing his arms like some kind of martyr. Because I've been the one working late every night this week, that's why. Oh, come on, Mason, I said, rolling my eyes in the most dramatic way possible. Don't make this about work. You've been working late because you volunteered to cover for Derek. That's not my fault. And you've been what? Sitting around watching Netflix while I'm busting my ass? Yeah, sounds fair. That one hit harder than it should have, mostly because I had been watching Netflix the night before. But that didn't make it okay for him to throw it in my face. Wow, Mason. I didn't realize relaxing in my own home after a full day of work was a federal crime. Should I beg your forgiveness now, or save it for later? I'm just saying you could pitch in a little more. I don't think that's unreasonable, he said, his tone ice cold now. God, you're so dramatic about this stuff. And you're lazy, I shot back before I could stop myself. The words landed like a slap. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Excuse me? You heard me. You're lazy. You always find an excuse not to do your share, and then you gaslight me into thinking I'm the problem. Gaslight? Are you serious right now? Don't pull that therapy buzzword crap with me, just because you don't want to empty a dishwasher. I could feel my blood boiling. This isn't just about the dishwasher, Mason. It's about the fact that you never take responsibility for anything. You always find some way to twist it so I'm the bad guy. He threw up his hands in exasperation. You know what? Maybe I wouldn't have to if you weren't so obsessed with controlling every little thing. God forbid, I don't follow your perfect little system to the letter. Maybe if you had a system, I wouldn't need one. Maybe if you weren't such a nag, I wouldn't feel like I'm living with my mom. That one stopped me in my tracks. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. My vision blurred with hot, angry tears. I can't believe you just said that. His face softened for a split second, but then he clenched his jaw and looked away. Well, I can't believe we're fighting over a damn dishwasher. For a long, tense moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the hum of the fridge. My throat felt tight, but I refused to let him see me cry. Instead, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door to our bedroom behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. It wasn't like we'd never argued before, but this felt different, nastier, more personal. I replayed his words in my head. Nag, mom, dramatic. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I could totally disagree with him. But then I thought about what he'd said about me not pitching in, and that's when the righteous anger kicked back in. How could he say that when I cooked most nights, cleaned the bathroom last week, and even took his stupid dog to the vet when he was too busy? I heard his footsteps outside the door but ignored them, staring at the pile of laundry on the floor like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Finally, he knocked. Can we talk? I didn't answer. Come on, this is stupid, he said. I didn't mean what I said, okay? But you weren't exactly nice either. My silence stretched on, partly because I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, and partly because I wanted him to squirm a little. I'm sorry, okay? He said after a moment. But I'm not unloading the dishwasher. That did it. I opened the door, glaring at him. Fine, I'll do it. But only because I'm tired of looking at your face. Fine. Fine. And just like that, we went back to our separate corners, still angry, still stubborn, but with a tiny part of me wondering if maybe I had gone too far. So, AITA? It started with a text from my sister about her art exhibit. She was excited, of course, and the message practically radiated her enthusiasm. It's happening! My first solo gallery show next Friday. Would love for you to come. Black heart, it was typical Anna. Dramatic, artsy, and a little over the top. She attached some pictures of her pieces, abstract paintings full of swirls and sharp edges, colors that made my head hurt if I looked too long. It's not that I disliked her art, I just didn't get it. My phone buzzed again. I'm inviting close friends and family only. Means a lot to me. Hope you can make it. I sighed, set the phone down, and glanced at my calendar. Work had been a nightmare lately, with tight deadlines and a boss breathing down my neck. Friday nights were sacred. I had plans already, plans involving my couch, a blanket, and the latest binge-worthy Netflix series. The thought of squeezing into some stuffy gallery, sipping overpriced wine while strangers in turtlenecks murmured about tonal dissonance, felt like torture. Besides, it wasn't like she was curing cancer or anything. An art show? Okay, cool. But it wasn't life-changing. She'd understand. I typed a quick reply, wow, congrats. Super proud of you. Might be tight with work, but I'll try. That way, I wasn't outright refusing, but I was managing expectations. No harm, no foul, right? Friday rolled around, and after a long week, I was exhausted. My phone buzzed around 6 p.m. Anna. I didn't even look at the message. Probably something about the event starting soon. I muted her notifications, popped some popcorn, and hit play on my show. It felt indulgent and deserved. The next morning, I woke up to another text. This one felt different, shorter, sharper. Guess you were too busy to show up. My stomach nodded, but I brushed it off. She'd get over it. I mean, it wasn't like I promised to be there. She had plenty of other people to celebrate with, people who were more into that artsy stuff. I assumed she was just being dramatic, as usual. A week passed before she called. Her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Do you even care about me? She asked. Of course I care. I said, caught off guard. What kind of question is that? You didn't come to my show, she said flatly. I was busy with work, I lied. It's not like it was your wedding or something. It was just an art show. I figured you wouldn't even notice if I wasn't there. There was a long silence, the kind that makes you squirm. Just an art show, she repeated, her voice trembling. Do you know how hard I worked for that? How long I dreamed about it? You're my brother, and you couldn't even bother to show up. Do you have any idea how that felt? Watching everyone else walk through those doors while I kept glancing at the entrance, hoping you'd come. I stammered, Anna, I didn't mean to, but you did. You meant to not come. You made that choice. Her voice cracked, and I realized she was crying. You think what I do doesn't matter. That I don't matter. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to defend myself, explain that it wasn't personal, that I just didn't think it was a big deal. But the truth stared me down, ugly and unflinching. I didn't think it mattered because I didn't care about it. Not enough, anyway. And somehow, I thought that wouldn't matter to her. That she'd just shrug it off. Anna, I'm sorry, I said. But the words felt small, pathetic. I didn't realize. Exactly, she snapped. You didn't realize. You never do. And I'm tired of it. We hung up, and I sat there, stunned. I replayed her words over and over. Had I really underestimated how much this meant to her? Or had I just been too wrapped up in my own world to notice? I convinced myself that my absence wouldn't mean anything, and yet, to her, it had meant everything. I want to say I made it up to her, that I planned some grand gesture to show her I cared. But the truth is, things are still awkward between us. She hasn't responded to my last couple of messages, and I keep wondering if I've done permanent damage. I can't shake the feeling that I could have easily avoided all of this by simply showing up for her, just once. AITA? When Kevin first suggested we get a dog, I was hesitant. He'd been going on about how he'd always wanted one since he was a kid, how it would bring more joy to the apartment, and get us both moving more. Sure, a dog sounded nice in theory, but I'd seen enough of my friends' pets to know they weren't all Instagram moments and snuggles. They were work, serious, day in and day out responsibility. Kevin brushed me off when I brought this up, claiming, "It's a team effort. We'll both pitch in. Besides, I'll take care of most of it since it's my idea." That was 3 months ago. Now, I'm sitting on the couch with Bailey, our 6-month-old golden retriever puppy, who is gnawing on what used to be one of Kevin's sneakers. He's sulking in the bedroom because, apparently, I'm too controlling about the dog and making a big deal out of nothing. I wouldn't be making a big deal if Kevin could manage to take Bailey outside for a walk before she decides our living room rug is her personal toilet. But let me rewind. When we first got Bailey, I'll admit, I fell in love faster than I thought I would. She was this wiggly little furball with floppy ears and those soulful brown puppy eyes that could melt even the iciest resolve. The first few days, Kevin was on top of everything, feeding her, taking her out, even waking up in the middle of the night when she cried in her crate. I thought, maybe I'd underestimated him. Maybe he really could handle this. That phase lasted about 2 weeks. It started small, almost unnoticeable. One morning, I woke up to her whining at the door while Kevin snored right through it. I nudged him. "Hey, Bailey needs to go out." He groaned, pulling the blanket over his head. "Can you do it? I took her out last night." I sighed and got up, figuring it was no big deal. Then it happened again, and again. Soon, I was the one taking Bailey out most mornings, feeding her before heading to work, and cleaning up the occasional accident when I didn't get to her in time. When I pointed this out to Kevin, he shrugged it off, saying, "You're just quicker than I am. I'll do it next time." But next time rarely came. Kevin's excuses became more creative. He was too tired from work to do the evening walks or had a headache when it was time to bathe her. Meanwhile, Bailey, being a puppy, was a whirlwind of energy and chaos. She chewed through our couch pillows, dragged trash across the kitchen floor, and turned every shoe within her reach into a soggy mess. I was exhausted trying to keep up with her, and it didn't take long for the resentment to start bubbling. One Saturday morning, I asked Kevin to take Bailey to the park while I cleaned the apartment. He rolled his eyes. "Why do I always have to do the fun stuff? You're making me look like the bad guy." I was stunned. "The fun stuff? You mean like playing with the dog you insisted we get while I stay here scrubbing your coffee spills off the counter?" Kevin threw his hands up. "I didn't insist. You agreed to. And I thought this was supposed to be a partnership." "Yeah, but you said you'd handle most of the work since this was your idea." "And I have. I just think you're overreacting. She's a dog, not a baby." By this point, Bailey was pawing at my leg, eager for attention, while Kevin stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me alone with the chaos once again. It came to a head 2 weeks later when I came home from work to find Bailey had gotten into the pantry. Flour and sugar were everywhere, and she'd somehow managed to knock over an entire bottle of olive oil, leaving a slippery mess across the floor. Kevin was sitting on the couch, headphones on, completely oblivious. I snapped. "Kevin, what the hell? Were you just going to let her destroy the place?" He pulled off his headphones and blinked at me, like I was the unreasonable one. "I didn't hear her, okay? I was working on something important." "Something important? More important than making sure the dog isn't eating God knows what while you ignore her. She's your responsibility too." "Oh, give me a break," he shot back. "You're the one who insists on micromanaging everything. You act like I don't do anything when I've done plenty." "Like what? Leaving her food bowl empty for hours because you forgot? Or skipping her walk last night so she'd pace around the apartment for an hour before bed? She's fine. You're the one acting like this is the end of the world." The argument escalated until Bailey, sensing the tension, slunk off to her crate and curled up in a corner. That's when it hit me. Our fighting wasn't just affecting us. It was affecting her. I looked at her little face, her ears flattened, and felt like the worst person alive. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Kevin, we can't keep doing this. Bailey deserves better. He stared at me for a long moment before finally nodding. You're right, but you have to admit, you've been a little overbearing. Overbearing? My voice rose again, but I stopped myself, exhaling sharply. Fine, maybe I have, but only because you've been slacking. And maybe I've been slacking because you keep acting like you're the only one who knows what's best for her. We sat there in silence, the weight of our stubbornness pressing down on us. I wanted to believe we could fix this, that we could come up with a plan to share the load. But part of me wondered if it was already too late. Bailey was ours now, and no matter how much we argued, she needed us to step up, for her sake. So we talked. We agreed to a schedule. Who would handle morning walks, who would do the feedings, and who'd clean up when she inevitably got into trouble again. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of frustration, but at least we were trying. Still, I can't shake the feeling that if Kevin hadn't pushed for this in the first place, maybe things wouldn't have gotten so messy. Now, though, I can't help but wonder. Am I the one overreacting? AITA? The story starts with a voice calling out my name, faint and distant, pulling me from the haze of a dream. It's my mother, standing at the edge of the backyard, calling me in for dinner. The evening light glows soft orange, casting long shadows across the grass. I don't move immediately, savoring the moment. At 13, the world feels endlessly big, and the yard is my kingdom. When I finally walk in, my sneakers crunch against the gravel path, and I wonder if I'll always feel this tethered to home. Fast forward 15 years. The dinner table has changed, but the dynamics remain the same. My wife, Rebecca, and I sit across from my parents in their well-lit dining room. The smell of roast chicken lingers in the air, but the warmth I felt in the backyard that evening all those years ago feels far away. We're talking about our plans, our dream to finally own a home, to plant roots. Dad nods thoughtfully, his chair creaking as he leans back, and then casually mentions his offer. I'll give you a down payment. Those words light a spark of hope. For weeks after, Rebecca and I pore over listings, run numbers, and imagine the life we could build. Colorado's been our home since college. It's where we met, where we found our first jobs, and where we fell in love with the mountains. But it's expensive. Townhouses start at prices that make my stomach turn. Yet we cling to Dad's promise. He'd been clear, hadn't he? A down payment for a house, a gift to set us up. The clarity shatters when the check arrives. It's generous, no doubt, but the number on the paper doesn't come close to what we'd envisioned. My dad calls it a starter, a sum he thought fitting for the kind of house one could buy back home, where he and my mom still live. He brushes off our protests with a shrug. I assumed you'd be smart enough to move somewhere cheaper, he says, his tone sharp as a slap. I feel something crack deep inside me. That spark of hope fizzles into anger. It's not just about the money. It's the assumption that our lives, our choices, don't matter as much as his idea of what's practical. Rebecca stays silent, her jaw tight, as I argue back. My dad waves me off, dismissing my words as though they're ungrateful noise. In the weeks that follow, Rebecca and I recalibrate. We cut expenses wherever we can, trading vacations and weekend trips for ramen dinners and budgeting apps. Birthdays go by with handwritten notes instead of presents. We decline family gatherings, each refusal met with confusion or outright frustration. Dad accuses me of punishing the family, of being a brat who can't appreciate a gift. His words sting more than I want to admit, but I hold firm. I tell him we're saving for a dream that means something to us, even if it's not one he understands. The tension between us grows thick, turning every phone call into a tightrope walk. When my sister buys a house back home with Dad's help, a fully paid-off gift, I can't suppress the bitterness. It's not about jealousy, I tell myself. It's about fairness, about feeling valued. But fairness is a slippery thing, and I catch myself wondering if I've blown it all out of proportion. One night, Rebecca and I sit on the balcony of our tiny apartment, the city lights twinkling below. She tells me about a dream she had, where we're standing on a mountaintop, our faces kissed by the wind. "This is what we're working for," she says, her voice steady. Her belief anchors me, even as the doubts creep in. The months stretch into a year, then two. We inch closer to our goal, our savings account growing like a slow tide. The distance between my dad and me becomes its own kind of landscape, one I don't know how to navigate. He doesn't visit. I don't call. The few times we talk, it feels like we're speaking different languages. Rebecca suggests inviting my parents to Colorado, a gesture of goodwill, but I balk. They've made no effort, I argue. Why should I? It all comes to a head one sweltering summer day, when my dad calls out of the blue. His voice is gruff, his words clipped. "Why haven't you come home?" he demands. I try to explain, to make him see that it's not about punishment but priorities. He doesn't listen. The call ends in a burst of frustration, both of us unwilling to bend. That night, I lie awake, the silence of the room pressing down on me. Rebecca's breathing is soft and even, a steady reminder of what we're fighting for. I think about my dad, about the backyard, about the unspoken bond we once shared. I wonder if it's still there, buried beneath the hurt and misunderstandings. The next morning, I write him a letter. I don't sugarcoat my feelings, but I don't lash out either. I tell him about the weight of his words, about the choices we've had to make. I tell him I'm grateful, even if it doesn't always show. I tell him I miss him, even if I don't know how to bridge the gap. Weeks go by with no response. Then, one day, a package arrives. Inside is a framed photo of the backyard, taken on a summer evening much like the one I remember so vividly. Tucked behind the frame is a note, scrawled in my dad's unmistakable handwriting. It's short, just a few lines, but it's enough to crack the wall between us. "I don't always agree with your choices," it says, "but I can see they matter to you. I'll try harder." It's not a resolution, not entirely, but it's a start. And sometimes, a start is all you need.